One of the most common claims in politics is this: people are voting against their own interests. You've probably heard it before. A struggling factory worker votes for tax cuts that mostly benefit the wealthy. An immigrant supports a politician who promises tougher immigration policies. A low-income voter opposes government programs that could potentially benefit them. And political commentators immediately ask, why would someone vote against themselves? But what if the question itself is flawed? What if people aren't voting against their interests at all? What if they're simply prioritizing different interests than the ones political analysts assume matter most? Today we're exploring one of the most controversial questions in political psychology. Why do millions of people support politicians and policies that seem on the surface to make their lives harder? So what does voting against your interests actually mean? Before we go further, we need to define the phrase. When people say someone is voting against their interests, they usually mean economic interests. For example, a voter earning $30,000 per year supports policies that may reduce social welfare spending, or a worker supports tax policies that primarily benefit higher income individuals. From a purely financial perspective, this can seem irrational. But humans don't make decisions based solely on money. Psychologists have long known that people are motivated by identity, religion, community, status, culture, morality, security, belonging. In many cases, these factors are more emotionally powerful than economics. So the real question becomes, which interests matter most to voters? One of the most discussed examples in American politics involves poor and working-class white voters, particularly in rural and southern states. Critics often point out that many of these communities struggle with lower incomes, poor healthcare access, higher rates of chronic illness, limited economic opportunity. Yet many consistently support politicians who advocate smaller government, reduced social spending, or lower taxes. Why? One explanation is identity. For many voters, politics isn't primarily about maximizing personal income. It's about protecting values. If a voter believes issues like religion, gun ownership, patriotism, cultural traditions, or local autonomy are under threat, those concerns may outweigh economic considerations. Another factor is distrust. Many voters simply do not believe government programs will actually help them. If someone views government as inefficient, corrupt, or hostile to their community, promises of assistance may not sound appealing. In that framework, they're not voting against their interests. They're voting according to a different hierarchy of interests. Another example often surprises people. Some immigrants support politicians who favor stricter immigration policies. At first glance, this appears contradictory. But political psychologists point out several possible explanations. Some immigrants distinguish between legal and illegal immigration. Others may believe stricter controls protect economic opportunities or public resources. Still others adopt the cultural and political attitudes of the communities where they settle. People frequently assume membership in a group determines political preferences. Reality is far more complicated. Immigrants are not a single voting bloc, nor are African Americans, Latinos, white voters, or any other demographic category. Individual experiences, values, and priorities often matter more than outside observers expect. Now we arrive at one of the most important concepts in modern politics, the single-issue voter. A single-issue voter may disagree with a candidate on 10 different topics, but one issue outweighs everything else, and for some people, that's abortion. For others, gun rights, religious freedom, taxes, climate change, gay rights, national security, immigration. Once a voter decides one issue is morally non-negotiable, every other issue becomes secondary, and political strategists know this. Entire campaigns are built around elevating certain issues to the top of voters' minds, not because they're necessarily the most important issues, but because they're emotionally powerful. And that's a clear sign of manipulation if ever there was one. Get people to focus on the issue you want to talk about, and not the issues that affect their lives. One of the most influential findings in political science is something called agenda setting. People don't necessarily think what politicians tell them to think, but politicians and media can strongly influence what people think about. Imagine a voter concerned about healthcare costs. If an election campaign successfully shifts attention towards crime, immigration, abortion, or gun rights, that voter's priorities may change. The issue dominating public discussion often becomes the issue dominating the ballot box. This doesn't require manipulation in a sinister sense, it's simply how human attention works. We focus on whatever appears urgent, and campaigns compete fiercely to define what voters perceive as urgent. One of the strongest findings in political psychology is that identity frequently overrides material self-interest. Humans are tribal creatures. We want to belong. We want to feel connected to people who share our values and worldview. As a result, voting can become less about policy and more about identity. The question shifts from, which policy benefits me, to, which side represents people like me? Once politics becomes part of personal identity, changing political views can feel like betraying family, community, culture, or even oneself. This helps explain why political arguments based solely on economics often fail. People aren't just defending policies, they're defending identities. So are people really voting against their interests? Here's where things become controversial. Many commentators assume economic self-interest should be everyone's primary concern, but that's a value judgment. A voter may sincerely believe that moral, religious, cultural, or constitutional issues matter more than financial gain. For example, someone might willingly accept higher personal costs if they believe they're protecting a constitutional right. Another person might support policies that reduce their income if they believe those policies align with their moral values. From the outside, this can look irrational. From the voter's perspective, it may be perfectly rational. Even within moral or cultural issues, there may be competing viewpoints that have been argued successfully to them by their chosen candidate. This would allow someone to focus on taking care of the unborn children, but ignoring the children already born, already in need of government support. In any event, the disagreement is often about which interests count at exactly this point in time. Economic interests, moral interests, cultural interests, national interests, community interests. Different voters answer that question differently. So why do poor people sometimes appear to vote against their own interests? Because human beings are not economic calculators. We are emotional, tribal, moral, cultural, social, and political decisions reflect all the emotional influences that their family, their tribe, community, or even merely their candidate has aroused their emotions best on. The better question may not be, why are people voting against their interests? But how have their interests, their emotions been defined for them? Because what looks irrational from one perspective may make perfect sense from another. The lesson for anyone trying to understand politics is simple. Never assume you know someone else's priorities better than they do. If you want to understand why people vote the way they do, start by understanding what they value, not what you think they should value. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment below and subscribe to see more videos that provoke thoughts like this one. Thank you for watching.